All right, ready to dive into something pretty interesting.
Always. What we got?
Well, today we're looking at the link between water, would you believe it, and a city's economic success.
Water and economics, huh? I'm intrigued.
Yeah, we're going to explore how some U.S. cities, even those in those dry areas, manage to do really well economically, even with limited water.
So think bustling cities, booming businesses, but not a whole lot of water to go around.
Exactly, it's kind of a puzzle, right?
Exactly.
So the basis for our deep dive today is this research paper from way back in 2011 from the journal Water Policy.
Okay.
And the title is, get this, The Economic Value of Water in Metropolitan Areas of the United States.
Catchy.
So the researchers, they focused on, well, they picked the top 32 most populated U.S. metro areas. This was back in 2005.
Yeah.
And they came up with this pretty interesting metric.
Oh, what's that?
They called it GMP over H2O.
GMP over H2O.
Yeah.
All right, break that down for me.
Okay, so GMP stands for Gross Metropolitan Product. Think of it as the city's economic output.
Okay, makes sense.
And then, of course, H2O. That's just water.
So GMP over H2O, that's basically measuring how much economic output a city gets for every drop of water they use.
Yeah, you could almost think about it like miles per gallon, but for a city's economy.
Interesting analogy. So like a high GMP over H2O means a city's squeezing a lot of economic juice out of each unit of water.
Precisely. And that's where things get interesting, right? Because you might think that cities with tons of water would naturally have a higher GMP over H2O.
Yeah, I'd kind of assume that.
But according to this research, it's not always the case.
Really?
Yeah, they found that cities facing water scarcity, like Las Vegas and Atlanta, they actually had high GMP over H2O values.
That's surprising. You'd think less water would hold them back.
Right. Makes you wonder what their secret is.
Yeah, how are they making it work?
Well, it seems like it's not just about how much water you have, but about how you're using it and managing it.
Smart management makes sense.
For example, Las Vegas, known for those crazy water features, actually uses a surprisingly small amount of water in its casinos.
Wait, seriously, those fountains everywhere, you'd think they'd be guzzling water.
Right. But it turns out a huge chunk of the water use in Las Vegas, and a lot of other cities too, is residential.
Ah, so things like landscaping, lawns, filling up pools, all that.
Exactly.
But you said Vegas has low casino water use.
Well, they've been pretty proactive about water conservation, especially when it comes to outdoor use, and it seems to be paying off.
So even in the desert, smart water management can boost the economy. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely something other cities could learn from.
For sure.
Now, another interesting thing the study highlighted is how thermoelectric power generation can affect that GMP over H2O.
Thermoelectric power generation. Now, how does that fit into the picture?
So basically, those power plants use a ton of water for cooling during electricity generation.
Ah, so a city that relies heavily on thermoelectric power might have a lower GMP over H2O just because they're using so much water for power, not necessarily because their other industries are inefficient.
Precisely. It's important to keep those nuances in mind when we're looking at these numbers.
Yeah, it's not as simple as more water equals more prosperity. There's a lot more going on.
Definitely makes you wonder, are there other cities out there defying expectations, doing well economically despite water limitations?
You know, the study actually highlights another interesting case, Atlanta.
Atlanta. Now, isn't Atlanta in a pretty water-rich region? I thought they had plenty of rainfall.
You'd think so, right? But they've actually had to deal with some pretty severe droughts in recent years.
So even though they're in an area that usually gets a good amount of rain, they're still facing water limitations, kind of like Las Vegas in a way.
Yeah, in a way.
So what are they doing about it?
Well, similar to Las Vegas, Atlanta's been focusing on promoted water conservation.
Makes sense.
They've got a tiered pricing system for water, so you pay more if you use a lot.
Hitting people in the wallet, that usually gets their attention.
Right. And they've also invested in water-efficient infrastructure and public awareness campaigns to encourage people to cut back on their water use.
Interesting. So we're seeing these different approaches to water management, whether it's a desert environment like Vegas or a more traditionally water-rich area like Atlanta.
It seems like no matter where you are, efficient water use can really help the economy thrive.
Absolutely. The research really emphasizes that we need to see water as a valuable economic resource, not something we can just take for granted.
Couldn't agree more.
So we've seen that water availability isn't the only thing determining a city's economic success.
Right.
Cities with limited water can still do well by managing it smartly.
Smart management is key.
But what about the possibility of moving water between regions? Could that be a solution? Maybe address water scarcity in some areas while boosting the economy in others.
Now, that's a really interesting question, and the researchers actually explored that idea.
Oh,
They proposed a pretty bold concept, a water market.
a water market. Now that's something I want to unpack.
Picture this. Cities buying and selling water rights, like they trade goods and services.
Like a stock market, but for water.
Kinda, yeah. So cities with high GMP over H2O, the ones that are really efficient with their water use, could buy water from areas where it's less economically valuable.
That's a really interesting idea.
Right.
But I can already see some potential problems.
Oh, yeah.
Like, wouldn't that just give wealthier cities with more money an advantage? They could just outbid everyone else for water.
That's a valid concern.
And what about the communities that rely on those water sources? What happens to them?
You're hitting on some of the big challenges with a water market.
Yeah.
The researchers acknowledge that there are a lot of ethical considerations, making sure things are fair and also thinking about potential environmental impacts.
This water market thing, it definitely raises more questions than it answers.
Yeah, it does.
We need to dig deeper into this, look at the pros and cons really carefully.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue with a lot of implications. Deserves a good look, for sure.
So before we get too deep into this water market idea, I want to circle back to Las Vegas for a sec.
Okay, yeah.
You mentioned that casinos actually use a pretty small amount of water compared to homes, which I found surprising.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that a little? Like, what are they doing specifically to conserve water in Vegas?
Well, they've been really strategic, especially when it comes to outdoor water use.
Right. Makes sense.
Think about it. Las Vegas is smack dab in the Mojave Desert.
Yeah, not exactly a lush oasis.
No, not at all. So watering lawns and all that landscaping, that just guzzles water in that kind of environment.
And a lot of it just evaporates anyway, right?
Exactly. So they've been pushing this thing called xeriscaping.
Xeriscape.
It's basically landscaping that's designed for dry climates, using plants that don't need a lot of water.
Ah, so like cacti and succulents and stuff.
Exactly. They've even offered incentives for people to replace their lawns with those kinds of plants, or even rock gardens.
So less grass, more rocks. Got it.
Pretty much.
What about those famous fountains, though? I mean, those got to be using a ton of water, right?
You'd think so, but a lot of them actually use recirculated water.
Oh, so they're not constantly using fresh water.
Nope, they have these systems that capture and treat the water so it can be used over and over.
That's pretty clever. They've really thought this through.
Yeah, they've also got some pretty strict rules about outdoor water use, especially during the summer.
Like what?
There are limits on how often you can water your lawn, and you're not even supposed to wash your car at home.
Wow, they're serious about this.
They have to be. And it's not just about outdoor use. A lot of the water used indoors, like in hotels and casinos, is treated and reused too for things like irrigation.
So they're really trying to create this closed-loop system where water is constantly being reused?
Exactly. It's like a circular water economy.
So Las Vegas, a city literally built in the desert, is a model for water conservation. Who knew?
It really challenges the idea that economic growth and water conservation can't go together.
Absolutely. They're proving that you can have both.
Now, going back to that water market concept, the researchers think that a system where cities can trade water rights could actually encourage even more conservation.
How so?
Well, if a city knows it can make money by selling its extra water to another city, it's going to be a lot more motivated to conserve, right?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It creates a financial incentive to save water.
Exactly. It could push cities to invest in water-efficient infrastructure and implement stricter conservation measures.
But there are obviously some big challenges to overcome before we could actually have a water market, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, we're talking about massive infrastructure projects to move water around, not to mention all the legal and political stuff involved with water rights and making sure everyone gets a fair share.
You've got that right. And we can't forget about the potential environmental impact either.
Yeah, moving water from one place to another could have all sorts of unintended consequences for ecosystems.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue with a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, the researchers definitely acknowledge those challenges. They emphasize that it would require careful planning, regulations, and community involvement to make it work. Now, fascinating idea, but it seems like we're still a ways off from seeing a water market in action.
I'd say so, yeah. But it's definitely a conversation worth having, especially with water resources becoming more and more strained, not just in the U.S., but globally.
Absolutely. This research has really opened my eyes to how closely linked water and economics really are.
It's not just about having enough water, it's about using it wisely and managing it effectively.
And realizing that water scarcity isn't just a problem for deserts, it's something that cities all over the world are going to have to deal with.
No doubt about it.
We talked about Atlanta earlier, how even though they're in a relatively water-rich area, they've still had to face droughts.
Right.
Did the researchers look at any other cities that are trying to balance economic growth with water conservation?
They did, actually. They highlighted the case of Denver, Colorado.
Denver. Interesting. What's their story?
Well, Denver's in a semi-arid region, so water's always been a precious resource there. But in recent decades, their population has boomed, which has put a lot of pressure on their water supply.
So how have they been dealing with that?
They've adopted a multi-pronged approach, focusing on conservation, investing in water reuse and recycling, and exploring new sources of water.
Can you give me some specific examples?
Sure, during droughts, they have mandatory water restrictions, limiting outdoor watering, and encouraging people to use water-efficient appliances.
So kind of similar to what Vegas is doing?
Yeah, a bit. They've also invested in a pretty sophisticated water reuse system, treating wastewater and making it available for irrigation and industrial use.
So they're not just relying on freshwater sources, they're trying to maximize the use of the water they already have.
Exactly, and they've been looking into tapping into new sources as well, like underground aquifers and even rainwater harvesting.
Wow, they're really covering all their bases.
It's a comprehensive approach that recognizes the need for both conservation and innovation to ensure a sustainable water future for the city.
Sounds like they're being proactive, trying to get ahead potential water shortages instead of waiting for a crisis to hit.
Yeah, and their efforts seem to be working. They've been able to keep their water supply relatively stable even with their growing population.
It's encouraging to see cities like Denver and Las Vegas leading the way in finding creative solutions to manage water, especially with climate change, making water scarcity a bigger issue in many parts of the world.
I agree. It shows that with careful planning, smart policies, and community involvement, we can achieve both economic prosperity and water security.
Absolutely. This research has really highlighted the importance of seeing water as an economic asset, something we need to value and manage carefully.
Couldn't agree more. For too long, we've treated water like it's an unlimited resource.
Yeah, like it'll just always be there.
Right, but as water scarcity becomes more common, we need to start thinking about water in economic terms.
And that means not just focusing on the cost of providing water services, but also considering the economic benefits of using water efficiently.
Exactly. When we start looking at water through an economic lens, we can find those win-win solutions that are good for both the economy and the environment.
This has been a really fascinating discussion. I've learned so much about how intertwined water and economics really are.
Glad to hear it. It's a topic that deserves more attention for sure.